Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The wife has decided to take revenge on her husband, but for what and how? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy it! I got home from work a little early that Wednesday because I wanted to change into a fresh shirt before dinner. It was a business dinner meeting with several contractors who wanted to hire my firm for a demolition project. Since Joyce wasn't going with me, I didn't really care what I looked like, but I wanted a clean shirt for comfort. I sweat a lot at my job. I drove up and saw Eileen's car and couldn't help but sigh in disappointment. Eileen was Joyce's sister. We didn't have much affection for each other, and it was an unpleasant surprise to see her there. Luckily, I didn't plan to stay long. When I walked into the kitchen from the garage, I saw Eileen but not Joyce. I threw my briefcase on the countertop and stared at her. She was several years older than Joyce and was a beautiful woman, but I didn't like her personality. "What are you doing here? Are you here to gloat with your sister, making a big deal about my mistake? Rubbing salt in my wound?" I asked. "Joyce asked me to come babysit while you both went to dinner. I didn't expect you back until 9 or 10 p.m. Why so early? Was dinner canceled? Did you get fired? Maybe it's my damn company, you fool. So who's going to fire me? I just want to change into a clean shirt." "What do you mean, we're both leaving? Joyce won't come with me?" At that moment, Joyce entered the kitchen, all dressed up to go out. Her black dress was quite formal, with a deep V-neckline, and her makeup was much heavier than usual. I noticed her outfit was quite revealing for a casual night out. Her appearance bothered me and suggested things I didn't like. When she saw me, her face darkened. She hadn't planned to see me tonight. She stared at me, looking somewhat nervous. "What are you doing here? You should be at dinner with clients," she said, her tone a bit strange. "What's the matter? You didn't want to go to dinner with me, but now you're dressed like that? Who are you going out with? You don't dress like that for your friends. It's none of your business." "I have my own plans," she replied, about to say more when the doorbell rang. She flinched, glancing at the clock and then at me. "I'll open it." "You stay here," I said, and followed her to the front door. I was curious about her reaction to the doorbell. When she opened the door, she briefly blocked it and said something while gesturing with her hands. Then, a man in a suit walked past her into the hallway. He smiled at her and leaned in, but she turned away. He seemed surprised but noticed she was looking in my direction and then saw me. I stepped into the hallway and asked Joyce, "Who is this and why is he here?" "This is Ron Mason. I work with him, and he came to take me to dinner. We have plans." "Ron, this is Russell, my husband. Nice to meet you." I ignored his extended hand and looked at his smile and Joyce's serious face. It was clear this was a date, and Ron knew about our issues. He seemed to be hoping for a good evening and wanted me to know it. I looked at Joyce's nervous twitching hands and knew I wasn't going to let this happen. "I'm sorry you came here for nothing, Ron, but my wife won't go with you. She shouldn't have misled you." Joyce was furious. "I'll go with whoever I want." "You can't say anything about this," she said, turning to get her coat. I walked up to Ron Mason, stood in front of him, and said quietly and calmly, "Get out of my house right now. My wife will not go with you today or any other day as long as she is my wife. Leave now, or I will throw you out." "Damn it, Russ, if you don't leave Ron alone, I'm calling the police," Joyce said, her voice rising. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Call 911 and order an ambulance for Mr. Mason, and then you can call the police for me," I said. Turning to Ron, I said, "Is she worth it? Decide now. You have 10 seconds. Otherwise, I'll deal with you myself," I said, my voice steady despite the anger inside. It was clear from his face that Ron was uncertain, despite being taller and heavier than me. I raised my wrist to check my watch, hoping he'd make a move before I had to see him leave. Ron quickly moved towards the door and was out within 5 seconds. I smiled to myself and then turned to Joyce. "This is not an acceptable choice, Joyce. I gave you 2 options, divorce or forgiveness. There is no third option. If this is what you want, then I will file the papers tomorrow morning. Either way, you will not date anyone else as long as you're married to me." I walked past her and went upstairs to the bedroom where I changed into a clean shirt. My heart was pounding, and I was breathing heavily. I knew that if I had to confront Ron one-on-one, things could get violent. Joyce knew I was capable of it, and I wasn't sure how I'd react to her if she challenged me. I was relieved I didn't have to find out. After splashing some water on my face and applying cologne, I was ready for dinner. I wasn't in the mood for socializing, but it was business. I went downstairs and found Joyce and Eileen in the kitchen. Joyce was still angry and began speaking almost immediately. "You humiliated me in front of him," she said. Instead of answering, I raised my hand in a threatening gesture, my face showing my rage. This was enough to silence her. I wanted to hit her, but I suppressed the urge. I took a deep breath and lowered my hand. It had been years since I felt such rage, but I managed to control it. I will repeat what I've already said. When I leave, if you decide to continue with your plans, I will take it as your decision. Divorce or forgiveness, there is no third option. Your attempt to get back at me is unacceptable. Think carefully, Joyce. With those words, I left for the hotel where I was supposed to meet with clients. I wasn't looking forward to the dinner, but it was necessary. When the evening ended, and after thanking the waiters, I headed home. It was almost 9:30, later than I wanted, but the dinner had gone well. We agreed on a few proposals, and I would finalize the details at work the next day. Overall, it was worth it. The work would be profitable and provide jobs for many of my employees. When I arrived home, I noticed Eileen's car was still there and shrugged it off. I walked in and saw Eileen sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. "Why are you still here? Has Joyce decided to go somewhere? Are the kids asleep?" Yes to both questions. "She told me to tell you that she's going to do whatever she wants and you'll have to live with it." Eileen said this but looked unhappy. I thought about it for a moment and then said, "Can you stay the night? Do you need to be home by a certain time?" She seemed surprised but then said with a mischievous smile, "I can stay." "What's up?" It was a sarcastic response, but that was all I needed. "I'm leaving, so you'll have to stay until she gets back. Tell her that my lawyer will contact her and let her know where I can be found. I'll begin the divorce process tomorrow morning." I went upstairs to our bedroom, where I took out the suitcases I kept for business trips. I packed enough clothes and toiletries for a few nights and closed the suitcases. I was ready. I sat down on the bed and allowed myself a moment to cry. I was heartbroken, realizing my marriage was over. I hoped and prayed Joyce would understand how I felt and how hurt I was by everything that had happened. I wiped my tears, stood up, and left the bedroom, possibly for the last time. I walked down the corridor and looked into my children's room. This was the hardest part, but I had no choice. I stood looking at them, a tear falling before I quickly wiped it away. This wasn't the time for tears. I carried my suitcases downstairs, trying to forget that I was leaving my children. I didn't know where I would go but planned to find a room for the night and look for accommodation later. I took my computer from the office and carried everything into the kitchen. Eileen was on the phone, and I assumed she was trying to reach Joyce but was having trouble. Well, that's a pity. Tell Joyce that someone will contact her at work tomorrow to find out the name of her lawyer and that she should get a good one because she'll need it. I will fight for custody of the children. I have no intention of being nice or fair now. She made her choice, and according to God, she will have to live with it. Good night, and I'm sorry you found yourself in the middle of all this, but you know this is what you always wanted, isn't it? I gave a curt apology. "I'm really sorry, Russ. No, this isn't what I wanted, but you probably won't believe me." I tried to warn her, but she didn't listen. "Please don't do anything drastic." With that, I walked out of my home and out of my marriage. It started almost 14 years ago. I was young, brash, and confident, having just returned from the army after spending 8 years learning various skills, including handling explosives. I had been very good at it and later modified the techniques for more practical use. Returning home to Youngstown, Ohio, I went to work as a blaster for a mining company. It was a well-paid job, mainly because many of the so-called experts didn't last long. I was confident in my skills and quickly became one of the leading experts in planting charges. After saving almost everything I earned, I decided to look for greener pastures. I moved to a demolition construction company where I continued to make good money and found the work fascinating. I learned from experienced colleagues and became one of the leading experts in demolition. My dream was to start my own company, and after a few years, I achieved it. Cranston Demolitions Incorporated was born, and I was Russell Cranston, 30 years old, with my own business. Within another 3 years, I was thriving, hiring skilled personnel, and expanding my operations nationwide. During this period, I started visiting local establishments, not to get drunk but to enjoy a beer and socialize. That's where I met Joyce. She was one of 5 women who walked into Clancy's Bar and Grill where I was hosting one evening. From the moment I saw her, I was captivated. She had a tall, slender figure, long blonde hair, and striking blue eyes. We danced together almost the entire evening, despite interruptions from other men. I got her name and number, and we continued to see each other. When I visited her home, I was surprised to find her family was wealthy and lived in an affluent part of the city. Despite my doubts, Joyce and I got along well. After a whirlwind courtship lasting almost a year, I proposed, and she accepted. Her parents took the news well, and I gained her father's respect when he learned about my successful company. However, her sister Eileen did not approve of me, but that didn't matter to me. Joyce said yes, and that was all that counted. We bought a nice house and started a family. Joyce had no trouble getting pregnant, and we quickly had our first child. She wanted to have 2 children and raise them while we were still young. 12 months later, Julie was born, and we now had 1 child of each gender. We were both happy with our growing family. For the next 5 years, our life seemed ideal. I loved my children and my wife, and she appeared as happy as I was. My company continued to grow, and we began taking on jobs overseas. I hired a few other ex-military personnel to handle travel and organizing, while I focused on reviewing and signing plans and handling only the most sensitive or complex jobs. In the summer of 2026, I took on a project in Brazil involving the demolition of a mountain to make way for land development. It was a straightforward task, similar to a previous project we had completed in California. However, given the substantial payment offered, I personally handled it. Joyce decided to stay home, so I took one of my team members instead. My only condition was that I would not stay more than a week. After completing the project, I flew home on a chartered plane provided by my hosts. I spent the weekend with my family and returned to Brazil the following Monday. Joyce was aware of this arrangement, so it continued for the next 2 weeks. During the 3rd week, after the project was completed, my clients hosted a farewell party. I wanted to say goodbye to some friends I had made during my stay. We had a great time, and I enjoyed the local wine. By the end of the evening, I was more intoxicated than I had ever been. I ended up spending the night with a woman who had shown interest in me. I remembered the events clearly, but it was a mistake I deeply regretted. The next morning, I apologized to her, but she indicated she had no regrets. The guilt of what I had done haunted me throughout the day and led to physical discomfort. Upon returning home, I struggled with feelings of guilt and anxiety, which began to affect my work. I decided I needed to confess to Joyce and seek her forgiveness. If I had spoken to someone experienced in handling such situations, I might have approached it differently. That Friday, after the children were asleep, I told Joyce what had happened. "Joyce, I need to tell you something. It's been hard for me to keep this a secret, so I have to be honest," I began. "What's wrong, Russ? Problems with the company? Did someone make a mistake?" "Well, it was a mistake, but it was mine. The last night I was in Brazil, I went to a party and drank a lot of wine. Their wine is much stronger than I realized, and I ended up spending the night with someone. I didn't fully comprehend what was happening until the next morning. I'm deeply sorry. It didn't mean anything, and I was too inebriated to recall the details." Joyce looked at me as though I had struck her. She stood up, crossed her arms, and tears streamed down her face. I tried to comfort her, but she pushed me away. Her eyes, burning with hurt and anger, met mine as she spoke. "You betrayed us, you traitor. How could you do this to me? What about the children? Did you even think about them? Did you remember you have a family? I tried to explain. I was drunk, Joyce. I rarely drink because I can't handle it. It was just wine, and I didn't know it was so strong. I didn't want this to happen. I love you and the children more than anything. Her anger was overwhelming, beyond what I had anticipated. She cried and moved around the kitchen, visibly more upset than I had expected. I'm going to bed. You can sleep in the guest room. I don't want you near me, she said, rushing upstairs and slamming the door behind her. The weekend was strained. Joyce didn't speak to me, and she and the children left early on Saturday morning without telling me where they were going. I spent the day alone, focusing on household tasks, waiting for their return. When they finally came back, I asked, "Where have you been all day? You didn't even leave me a note telling me where you would be. What if I had tried to find you?" I was a bit frustrated. "What do you care?" she retorted with a smirk before turning and walking away. I guess this is how it would be now. I'd be left to endure the consequences until she either forgave me or something else happened. I probably deserved it, so I decided to stay busy and avoid giving her reasons to be more upset. Joyce continued her silence for another 2 weeks before she finally broke down and spoke to me. It was after dinner when the children were asleep. I was sitting in the living room, reviewing some documents related to demolition work. I had just finished making my notes when she came in and sat down across from me. "We need to talk," she said, still looking upset but at least willing to communicate. "Okay, I agree. We do need to talk. I think I've said everything I needed to say." "The next step is up to you," I responded. "I'm still angry and need to find a way to forgive you. I don't know what that way is, but whatever it is, you might not like it. I just want to warn you in advance," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze was harsh, and it made me uneasy. "I don't quite understand what you mean. I don't care what you decide to do to deal with your anger, but there are things I can't accept, no matter what. You know what I'm talking about. I would never accept deliberate betrayal." She countered, "You're not in a position to tell me what I can or can't do. If you were allowed to make a mistake, why shouldn't I?" I wanted to clarify, what I did was wrong, and I didn't do it intentionally. It happened because I was drunk, and I regret it deeply. I would never have acted that way if I had been in my right mind. I understand you're hurt and angry, but deliberately cheating on me won't fix anything. If you do this, it will only prove that our marriage is over. I won't accept betrayal in any form, I said firmly. Joyce's face flushed with anger. After a moment of struggle, she said, "You can't tell me what to do. You messed up, and now you have to deal with the consequences. Be prepared for whatever I decide." I stood up to meet her gaze, determined. "I have a choice too, and it's called divorce. Your choice is whether or not I follow through. I won't accept cheating for any reason." She glared at me, her anger palpable. As she turned and walked away, I felt a mix of anger and worry. I wondered if Joyce might be hiding something else and using this situation to deflect or manipulate. Several weeks passed with this tension lingering. I hoped things would improve, so I invited Joyce to a dinner I was hosting with 2 clients interested in a demolition project. I thought it might interest her, but she quickly declined. "I don't want to go to dinner with you and your clients. All you'll talk about is work, and I'll be bored. Go have some fun, maybe you'll get lucky and find someone to go home with. Those construction workers, as you call them, paid for everything we have. It seemed normal when you wanted that new kitchen, that trip to Cancun, or that new dress you bought last week. I knew you thought so little about my business. I never liked what you do, explosions. I'm embarrassed to tell people what you do." This silenced me. I never knew she felt this way. We always worked hard to achieve success and dreamed of retiring when the kids left home. We planned to move to the coast, buy a boat, and sail along the coast, stopping when we found an interesting place. It was our dream. But now, with my face like a mask and blood rushing to my neck and face, I answered very quietly, "I'm sorry you think so little of my company. I'll go without you then. You don't need to worry about that." I left her and went outside to cool off. I knew she was angry, but why did she have to say what she said to hurt me? Well, she succeeded fully. She was obviously ashamed of me, and now she was angry enough to tell me this for the first time. Eagerly, I got in the car and simply drove around the city for the next 3 hours, ending at one of the parks I had helped clean up. I walked around, looking at the new trees, benches, tables, walkways, and the covered area used when unexpected rain started to fall. What I saw gave me a feeling of pride, not shame. I got home late that night, parked in the garage, and closed the door. I sat in the car trying to decide what to do next. This went on for too long. I had to do something or our marriage would end. I just didn't know what exactly. Eventually, I went inside to face Joyce and her venomous reproaches. "Where the hell have you been? It's past 8, and the kids have been asking where you are." I was outside, not that you cared. I was too angry to stay and argue. "Oh, you. I'm tired of this already." Furious, I left her to find the children. I sat with them until they went to bed and then put them to bed myself. Maybe I'll have to get used to it. This could become my way of life. It was well after midnight when I went upstairs to bed. Joyce had left earlier, but that didn't change anything. Although I returned to the bedroom, we had not been close since I told her what happened. I had no expectations and hoped that if I waited long enough, she would fall asleep. That didn't happen. Tonight, she stopped me as I walked by on my way to the guest room. "Russ, I'm sorry for what I said earlier. I'm not ashamed of what you do. I just said it to anger and hurt you. I'm sorry. Actually, I believe you were telling the truth, Joyce. I see the way you act around my employees. I see the way you turn away when someone I know sees me in public. I hear you and your sister talking, and I'm listening to you tell your mother how rude some of my friends are. I just never paid attention to it before. I didn't know that you were so ashamed of me in front of your friends. Now I know that's not true. Sorry, Russ. I didn't mean it like that. Okay, Joyce, let's just forget about it. I'm really tired tonight and don't want to fight with you anymore. I'll stay in the guest room." With that, I walked past her and headed to the guest room we kept for her parents when they came to visit. We were cold towards each other for the rest of the week until that night of dinner. I had already stopped trying to appease her and just accepted that she would no longer help me with the business, especially now that I knew how she felt about it. But you know what happened that night, which brings us back to the present, my departure, leaving Eileen desperately trying to contact Joyce. I drove off and found a small, secluded hotel with a sign saying rooms available. I checked in, taking a room on the first floor with a large bed and a small kitchen. It cost $180 a night or $1,500 a week, cash only. It took a week. I unpacked my clothes, hung them up, and put the rest in drawers. Not bad, at least it was clean and dry, and the sheets looked decent. I checked the bathroom and found it clean. I didn't need anything else. I sat on the bed trying to decide what to do next. I was curious about what Joyce would do when he got home. In fact, I was more than a little curious since I was still nervous. I decided to go to the house and wait a little way away to see for myself. I left and drove to the house, parking at the bottom of the street. I saw that Eileen's car was still there, and I could see the driveway and the front door. The light from the streetlight allowed me to see who was in the car when she got home. Her car was in the garage when I left, so she must have been with someone. I made myself comfortable and began to wait. Only 10 minutes had passed when I saw a car approaching. I ducked down to make the car appear empty and let them drive by before getting back up. I watched the car pull into our driveway and stop. The headlights went off, and I saw Joyce in the passenger seat and a man in the driver's seat. I couldn't clearly see if it was Ron Mason, but the car looked familiar. For the next few minutes, nothing happened, but I saw the curtains in the house being pulled back several times. Eileen must have been waiting to talk to Joyce. Then I saw Joyce lean over and kiss the man. He hugged her, and they shared another kiss. Watching them, my anger grew to the point where I began to contemplate confrontation. When the front door opened, Eileen ran down the path towards the car and knocked on the window. Joyce turned to see Eileen and rolled down the window. Eileen, clearly agitated, yelled at her, waving her arms. No matter what she said, Joyce began to worry and jumped out of the car, running towards the house with Eileen following, forgetting about the man in the car. He got out and stood there, observing the two women, but then got back into his car and drove off. It took no more than a minute before my cell phone started ringing. I saw that it was Joyce calling from our home phone. I let the call go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again, and I saw that it was Eileen's phone. How did they think I didn't know her number? I decided the best thing to do was just turn off the phone. I sat there, my thoughts going back to what I had seen, and I felt the first signs of doubt about my feelings for Joyce. I left and headed back to the motel, remembering a bar across the street that seemed like a good place to go. I returned to my room well after 2 a.m., feeling no pain. Joyce was just a mild irritant, nothing more. I slept deeply that night. The next morning, I called the office and spoke with Jerry McCain, my deputy. I told him where I was and asked him to come to my room, bringing the contracts I had started drawing up the day before regarding the clients I had met with the previous night. He was curious but smart enough to just do as I asked. I also called my lawyer and scheduled an appointment for 1:30 p.m. perfect for me. When Jerry arrived, I explained my personal issue and the meeting from the night before. He could handle the business issues and, although the personal matter didn't concern him, I wanted him to be aware of why I would be gone for the next few weeks. He agreed to manage everything for me, just as he had done before when I was traveling or on vacation. He was smart enough to forget what I told him about Joyce. As he was leaving, he suggested, "How about we set up a little gas explosion at that guy's house? It happens all the time, and no one but you and me will know anything." "Thanks, Jerry, but not now." "Maybe it will come to that, but for now, let's keep it just between us," I replied. I then had a thought. Why don't you get someone to check the records to see what assets this guy owns? It might come in handy. He smiled and left. My meeting with Saul Steinberg didn't go as smoothly. He was unhappy with the plans to file for divorce. He had information about my business and Joyce's income and didn't like the amounts that could be considered in a divorce. The state doesn't consider reasons like adultery. Any divorce must be filed as no fault. I might be able to cause her some inconvenience if I sued her lover for alienation of affection, but that would be risky. What if the lover had no money? Saul wanted to see if he could work things out to save me money. I told him to prepare something and we could discuss the terms later. I also asked him to set up 2 trust funds for the children and to find the best ways to fund them. I could file for guardianship, of course, but infidelity would only play a role if I could prove she exposed the children to danger, which was not very likely. I instructed Saul to call Joyce's lawyer and let her know I was serious. He agreed and said he would call later in the day. I drove back to the motel and went to the bar across the street, ordering a burger and a beer. I decided to stay sober now that my anger had subsided. From now on, I would stay calm. I took a booth, turned on my phone, and checked my call log, 17 calls from Joyce. I went through the list, deleting them all. My phone rang again. This time, I answered. "Hello?" "Russell, where the hell are you?" she screamed into my ear. I looked at the phone and closed the lid, unwilling to listen to the nonsense. I had seen her the night before and knew what she did. I had told her clearly before I left that night what would happen if she crossed the line. The phone rang twice more before I answered. "Yes?" No screaming this time. "Russell, please tell me where you are. You didn't come home last night, and I was worried." "Where are you?" "Honey, please tell me where you were last night." "Joyce, I told you what would happen if you did this, and you did it anyway." "So I left, just like I promised." "There were 2 choices, and you didn't listen." "No, I just went with my friends from work. I was angry and just wanted someone to talk to. That's all. Honestly, honey, now please just come home." "Sorry, Joyce, a lie isn't the best way to start this. I was sitting down the street when you came home. It wasn't just any friend, and the kiss you gave him wasn't the kind you give to friends. It seems like it's not the first time. You've never been good at hiding things, Joyce. So, Paul will call you today. Let him know who you want as your divorce lawyer." With that, I ended the call and turned off the phone. I was done talking to her. My burger and beer arrived, and I enjoyed them. I had another beer before heading back to my room. I called Jerry and got an update on the situation. He mentioned a job opportunity in Rio that someone wanted us to consider, so I noted down the name and number and made the call the next day. I checked in with Jerry and Saul and found out that Joyce was in a panic, calling both of them almost every hour. She was convinced I was serious and didn't know how to reach me. I hadn't given my motel number to anyone except Jerry, and he wouldn't tell Joyce. He didn't like her and had always avoided her. It had been 4 days since I left the house. We spent one of those days with Saul and Jerry, and the next 3 days driving around the city, checking on work and past projects. I enjoyed my free time, and the thought of retirement became more prominent. Saul and I calculated the value of the business. It was more than 7 figures, enough to allow me to retire comfortably, even if I had to share it with Joyce. Both Justin and Julie, our children, were provided for by a trust fund that Saul had created and funded. They would be fine regardless of the fight between Joyce and me. On the 5th day, I decided to call Joyce to arrange a time to talk. We had some issues to resolve, including child custody. I called her twice, reassuring her that I was fine and just very busy. Although I told Eileen I would file for full custody, I wasn't serious. Joyce was a wonderful mother, and the children needed her more than they needed me. Joyce would never put them in danger. Russell, please don't hang up again. I need to see you. You didn't come back last night, and I was worried. Where are you? Honey, please tell me. Actually, Joyce, I think we really need to talk. When would it be convenient for me to come over? Anytime now, tonight, whenever. I'm at home, just waiting for your call. Did you and Ron, are you still together? Ron was never in the house except for the night you made him leave. We're not together. It was my mistake, and I'm so sorry. Okay, I just don't want to run into your acquaintances when I come over. How about tonight? Can you ask your parents to pick up the kids today? Sure, around 6. I can make dinner. What about 7? And don't cook dinner. Okay, 7 o'clock then. I hung up the phone, sat on the bed, and let the tears fall. No matter what she did, I loved her, and it wasn't easy to turn that off. It couldn't end that easily. When I arrived exactly at 7 o'clock, she was waiting. The door opened before I could touch it. She stood there, looking a little scared and nervous. She stepped aside, and I entered. I went to the kitchen and sat at the table. Joyce followed me, went to the counter, and made coffee for us, one with a little sugar for me, and black for her. She put the cup in front of me and sat down opposite me. I noticed she didn't seem to handle it well. She looked tired, her hair was combed but lacked its usual shine, and her face was puffy and swollen, probably from crying. Unfortunately, I felt almost nothing while looking at her. I decided to start the conversation and let it go where it would. I told her about the divorce and that Saul had prepared some preliminary figures we needed to discuss. I wanted to send them to a lawyer first. No, Russell, I don't want a divorce. I love you, and I admit that I made a big mistake. I'm sorry, Russ, but don't let this mistake ruin our lives and our marriage. I saw your mistake, Joyce. It was not a simple mistake. You promised to take revenge on me and used him for it. I told you what would happen if you crossed that line. I don't want to hear any more of your excuses. No, Russell, please. I'm sorry. I forgive you. We have to move on for the sake of the children. They don't deserve to suffer because of my mistake. You were right, I should have forgiven you and moved on. I'm doing it. I forgive you. Please cancel the divorce and come home. I looked at her and saw that she was scared, but I didn't believe her about her time with Ron Mason. Joyce was not the forgiving type if she had promised to take revenge. I had seen some of it but didn't know the whole truth. I had suspicions but not facts, and I started all this with my own actions. What should I do? I need time to find out the truth. Okay, Joyce, let me think about it. I'm not sure I believe you, but I did start this. I'll tell Saul to hold off on the divorce while you and I try to work this out. Thank you, Russ. You won't regret it. We can work this out and get back to the way things were. Please come home right now. Not tonight. I need time to think and make decisions. I gave you 2 choices, and you tried to create a third. Now I need to decide. I know I messed up, but I apologized and didn't plan for it. You didn't believe me, and I didn't listen until I got my revenge. Now you want to forgive me and have me come home. It makes me wonder what you really did. No, I didn't do anything beyond that kiss, and I've apologized for it. I just realized what it means to be without you. This week has taught me a lesson. I don't want to be without you. Please come home and let's start again. I'll call you, but I don't want to be here tonight. I need to leave. I left immediately before she could start another wave of pleading. I needed to think and decide if I believed her. I needed time alone. I headed back to my bar and a few cold beers. 2 days passed before I decided to go home and give it a chance. Maybe Joyce had been unfaithful, but I didn't know for sure, and it wasn't enough to make me give up. If I messed up and she did too, well, maybe we were even. She challenged me and reached my limit, but so what? I loved her and didn't want our marriage to end. In the end, I decided to support my family. Joyce was true to her word. She didn't mention the past issue and did everything she could to show me that she had forgiven me. When I returned home, the first night was almost like our honeymoon. I returned to work, and Joyce surprised me by quitting her job at the real estate agency. She said she didn't want to see Ron Mason anymore, and if she stayed, she would see him every day. She mentioned that the memories of what almost happened were too much for her. I agreed, but wondered if this was the real reason. The thought running through my mind was that Joyce had given up too easily. I knew her well and knew that when she decided to do something, she did it. Nothing could stop her. She threatened to cheat on me to get revenge, and she never made empty threats. I began to believe even more strongly that she had already done it. With that in mind, I focused on a few things since returning home. First, the value of the company. Saul and I assessed the worth and found that the amount was well over $4 million, considering all open contracts and the reputation we had established. We didn't have a lot of concrete assets, but our knowledge and experience added to the value. I met with Jerry and several key people to discuss a potential sale. We worked out a stock buyback plan with Jerry and 7 others that I proposed to the company. We even received letters of intent from several financial institutions. The price was below our best estimate, but I preferred to sell to Jerry, as he was an integral part of the company, just like me. His loyalty was worth the difference. Finally, I spoke with Buddy Zaragoza, a leading security expert we sometimes worked with. There were often situations where security was needed to ensure that buildings we were going to demolish were empty and stayed that way. Homeless people liked to return to empty buildings and weren't very good at reading signs. Buddy's team was so well equipped that they could hear someone breathing in some areas. I made some arrangements with him. It had been almost a month since I returned home, and I have to admit that everything was going very well. Joyce continued to be a loving wife and wonderful mother. She helped in both the kitchen and with the kids, making meals more enjoyable. We talked and had fun. I felt more confident, but I had doubts and wanted to be sure. I arranged for Buddy to come to the house one night when I took Joyce and the kids out to dinner. We went to a pizzeria, ate pizza, and drank cold drinks. The kids were delighted, and Joyce appreciated an evening where she didn't have to cook. We were gone for almost 2 hours, which was more than enough time for Buddy. When I got home, I spent over an hour trying to find what Buddy had done, but I couldn't see anything. He was good, that's for sure. Almost 2 weeks later, Buddy called me at the office. He wanted me to come see him. He had something I needed to hear. I said I'd be there in an hour. As I sat at the table, my heart pounded with fear. What did he have? Was this what I was afraid of? Did she do it again? Thoughts like these ran through my head, and by the time I left, my stomach was hurting. I had to go and find out the truth. When I arrived, Buddy took me to a small meeting room equipped with several monitors and 2 large speakers. He sat me down at the table, walked over to a small control panel, adjusted some settings, and then sat down next to me. What you're about to hear is a conversation between your wife and her sister Eileen. If I'm not mistaken, this was from last night. Nothing significant happened before. I was hoping it would continue like this, but listen for yourself. We listened to the recording as agreed, with Buddy offering to fast forward to the important parts. He pointed the remote at the console and pressed a button. After dinner, Joyce mentioned that Ron invited her for a drive. "What did you say?" Buddy asked. "You didn't go with him, did you?" "Yes, I went. I was so mad at Russell that I just wanted to stay away. The dinner was enjoyable, and Ron is a good listener, but it was over quickly." "I just wanted to stay away," Joyce replied. "Well, nothing happened, right? You didn't do anything with him?" Eileen asked. "We went to the park at 5th and Concord, the one where we take Justin and Julie. We parked behind some empty cars. We talked for a while and then kissed," Joyce admitted. "Damn it, sister, tell me you stopped there." "Just a kiss, nothing more." "I hope you didn't risk your marriage for that," Eileen pleaded. "No, we didn't stop there," Joyce confessed. Buddy stopped the recording. I stood up, feeling sick. Buddy took my hand and led me to the bathroom. I went in, vomited, and stayed there until the cramping stopped. I rinsed my face with cold water and leaned over the sink, trying to calm myself. I didn't want to listen anymore, but knew I had to. I walked out to finish listening to the recording of my wife's betrayal. Buddy said, "We need to listen more. It's the same thing there. I'll just take the tape and listen to it while I'm alone. I don't need to humiliate myself in front of you anymore." "Well, there's one more part you need to hear. There's no explicit content, though," Buddy said. "Okay, whatever. Just turn it on," I replied. Buddy put on his headphones, listened for a few seconds, then stopped. "Here it is. You need to hear this. It all started with Eileen talking to Joyce." "But why did you do it? Why did you do it after Russell threatened you?" Eileen asked. "I didn't want to end my marriage. I was so angry when he cheated on me. I know he said it was an accident and he was drunk, but that doesn't change what happened. I had to get revenge. Then he humiliated me in front of Ron, and that made me even angrier. I knew I had to do something to get back at him. The only difference was that he wasn't supposed to find out. I knew I was cheating on him with Ron Mason behind his back, and he would never have known. It was my secret. In fact, that's why I can still accept Russell now, because it's his first time in his car. But what if he finds out? What then?" Eileen asked. "He won't find out. That's why I quit my job, so I wouldn't have to see Ron every day. I couldn't stand it. It's good that it's over. I'm really worried about you. If he finds out, you'll lose too much," Eileen said. "Just forget it." "It's better," Joyce replied. "Who said it's over? I'll probably do it again." Buddy stopped the recording and leaned back, watching me, waiting for my reaction. "That sums it up, doesn't it?" "It's worse than I suspected," I said, standing up and testing my shaking legs. I knew they would hold up. I asked Buddy for the recording, and he handed me the CD. I put it in my briefcase, planning to make a copy before giving it to Saul. I drove back to the office, worked on a few ideas, and then drove home. I needed to think and plan. As I listened to my wife's words destroying our marriage, I knew what I wanted to do. Everything was clear now. This was the beginning of my realization that our marriage was over and that I no longer loved her, not in the way I once did. I was still attached to her, but now that I knew the depth of her deceit and betrayal, I felt the love fade. I pulled into the garage and entered the house to be with my family. I was going to enjoy these next few weeks, knowing it wouldn't happen again. There would be no change in my behavior until I was ready. While I was gone, I planned to spend as much time with the kids as possible and prepare to discuss things with Joyce, but I would do so with a different perspective. Joyce and I continued to live as if nothing had changed. If she noticed a difference in our relationship, she didn't mention it. Perhaps she was trying to avoid discussing the past. I didn't bring it up either, not wanting to talk about it. For 3 months, we functioned as husband and wife, mother and father, but not as intimate partners, at least from my side. I simply treated her as someone who had betrayed me. I continued to monitor calls in the house using the equipment Buddy had left me. The recorder was now hidden in the garage, in the corner of my tool rack. Joyce never went near the tools, and Justin wasn't allowed to use them, so it was safe there. I would check it in the evenings, pretending I was working on some project. After 3 months, Joyce hadn't mentioned Ron Mason once, and I began to wonder what she was waiting for. While reviewing phone records, I came across one noteworthy call. Joyce had contacted Eileen to see if she could look after the baby the following week. It turned out Joyce was planning to meet Ron for dinner. When Eileen directly asked about this, Joyce acted flirtatiously, giggled, and hinted but did not explicitly confirm that she intended to resume a relationship with Ron. I was surprised that Eileen was persistent in discouraging Joyce from seeing Ron, given her dislike of me. Joyce was very cautious in her statements, not mentioning Ron by name until now. I decided to use this information to apply some pressure on Joyce. My opportunity came the next evening during dinner. It was Friday, and I came home early, which was unusual for me. I had been working hard on some proposals and spent several evenings at home, but now those assessments were nearly complete, and I could afford a break. After dinner, Joyce and Julie washed the dishes while Jason and I dried. It was a routine we tried to maintain with the children, making them part of the process. We often talked about our plans and days. That night, Joyce asked, "Russ, do you have any plans for next Wednesday?" I wanted to go to dinner with some former colleagues. I called Eileen, and she can babysit until you get home. I won't be long, we'll leave around 4:30. Do you mind? I responded, I didn't know you kept in touch with your former colleagues. What's the occasion? Joyce seemed nervous and clearly didn't like answering questions. Instead of answering, she responded defensively, "Why should this be a problem? I haven't gone anywhere for the last 3 months since I quit my job. I just want to see some of my friends." Is that a problem? No, I have no problem, I said. Will Ron be there? Her reaction was too quick and too angry to be convincing. Of course not. I told you it's with the girls, she said, her face showing anger as she looked down at the sink. I could see she was lying. Thanks to the recording, I was sure of it. Joyce was a terrible liar and became nervous and anxious when she lied. I got what I wanted to know, even though I made her nervous. I decided to let it go. It wasn't worth pushing further. Okay, that suits me. I'll be home at the usual time, and you can go and enjoy yourself, I said, finishing drying the dishes and moving to the living room to watch the news. I knew she was planning to meet Ron for dinner and likely spend the evening with him. If he was smart, he already had a room booked. I planned to check the recorder that night, anticipating she might call him soon. Joyce came in after the kids had gone to play video games and sat next to me. She leaned her head on my shoulder and began stroking my hand. I let her do it to see what she would do. Sorry, Russ. I know you still don't trust me very much, but honestly, it's just a dinner with the girls. Ron won't be there because he wasn't invited. You can check if you want, the reservation is in my name, she said. There's no need. I don't want to check on you every time you go out. If I have to do that, we won't have a real marriage. I know I screwed up and that you were angry, so it's my fault that you did what you did. I'm just glad it didn't go beyond that kiss. I can forgive it, especially now that you've forgiven me, right? I said. Of course, she replied. I told you that, and I hope I've shown it. We've been having a lot of fun lately. I see that you've forgiven me. I have forgiven you, and I know you would never betray me like that. You love your family too much to do that. I made a mistake, but it shouldn't cost us our marriage. I just wish I had the strength and integrity you showed in controlling your actions. I trust you completely. Her momentary tension was a clear sign, and when her hand stopped for a moment, it was enough to convince me she was still planning to be unfaithful. All I could do was wait for her to act. It was so obvious that she was lying, and I wasn't sure how she could claim to love me after all that had happened. I let it go, allowing her to believe she had cleared my doubts. It was a shame Joyce wasn't more discreet. Perhaps we could have saved our marriage, but she was too selfish and too blinded by her anger to see that what I did and what she did were entirely different. I was remorseful and had promised not to repeat my mistakes, but she was indifferent about her actions and seemed intent on repeating them. Her anger blinded her judgment, and she justified her behavior by blaming me. As expected, Joyce called right after I went into the garage and closed the door. I saw the recorder activate and waited. It only took 5 minutes before the call ended. Joyce was likely putting the kids to bed at that time, so I removed the recorder, rewound it to the beginning of the call, and listened. Hello. Hi, Ron, this is Joyce. Hi, honey. I've been waiting for your call. Are you ready to meet again? I can't wait to see you again. Well, that's why I'm calling. I'll be free from 4:30 on Wednesday. I made a reservation at the Rada for dinner and was hoping you could meet me there. Why have dinner? I'll book a room, and we can spend the whole evening together. I have a few ideas on how we can spend our time. Sounds like fun to me. Last time was fantastic, so I hope it will be the same on Wednesday. Don't worry. I'll take care of everything. Trust me. I'm counting on it. I'll meet you in the lobby around 4:25. We'll have about 2 hours or a little more. See you then. That was the entire conversation, just confirming the meeting and recalling their past encounters. Joyce had lied to me about the dinner and Ron's involvement. It wasn't just a matter of revenge. Joyce seemed to be plotting to make me stay home with the kids while she spent time with her lover. It was Joyce at her worst, revealing a depth of deceit and selfishness I hadn't anticipated. I knew her well, but I had never imagined she could be so cruel and calculating. If this was her behavior when she was angry, there was no future for us. I inserted the CD into the recorder and pressed the copy button. Her conversation was copied onto the CD with the date and time. After it was completed, I removed it and put it in an envelope to give to Saul. The weekend passed with no more calls or lies, except when she expressed her love for me again. There was no love on my part, but she didn't seem to notice. On Monday, I arrived at the office and called Jerry to discuss our plans. I had established the identity and bank accounts in the name of Juan Ramirez, a Mexican citizen. It cost me over $10,000, but I had all the necessary documents, including a Mexican passport and ID. I even had a fake ID card and driver's license in that name. Since I spoke Spanish fluently, no one questioned it. It's amazing what money can accomplish. All funds in this account were held at the Bank of Mexico branch in New York. Mr. Ramirez had access to these funds in Mexico using the fake identity. I opened an account and deposited $1,000 to activate it. On Tuesday, I called Saul and Jerry and went to see him. Saul provided the name of the lawyer who would handle the case, as I didn't want him involved in the specifics. I made a deal with Jerry to sell the company for a certain amount, which was to be kept in a separate file accessible only to him and his partners. We had 2 copies of the deal, one for Saul and one for Jerry, who would keep it confidential for now. We had worked out the details some time ago, and now it was a matter of completing the transaction. Jerry and I went to the new lawyer's office, where we transferred $2.5 million from a reserve account set up for Jerry and the others to Juan Ramirez's account. The lawyer prepared a transfer receipt and provided it to Jerry, along with a signed document transferring ownership from me to Mr. Ramirez for 80% of Cranston Demolitions Incorporated. After completing this operation, we returned to the office, where Jerry transferred $1,350,000 from the same account to my personal account at a local bank. The documents indicated the transfer of 20% of the company to my name. This receipt was attached to the deed for the building where my company was located and to all shares and funds and corporate accounts. My name was removed from the register of owners and replaced with Jerry's name and charter. Jerry and his new corporation were now the owners of Cranston Demolitions Incorporated. Saul only knew about this transfer so he could accurately state that the transaction amount was $1,350,000. I handed Saul the prepared CDs and went with Jerry to the office to finalize the transfer. We informed key employees that the transaction was complete. From that point on, I was unemployed and no longer the boss. It was a sad but necessary change. I had built the company from the ground up, but now it was someone else's responsibility. After a brief round of congratulations, I left to finalize my plans. I checked my balance at the Bank of Mexico in New York. The money was in the account and would be confirmed by the end of the working day tomorrow. On Wednesday, Juan Ramirez would become a multimillionaire. He already owned a beautiful home in Puerto Vallarta, a fully restored 1987 Gulf Star yacht, and had 3 employees awaiting his return. I fully intended to complete this as soon as possible. As I drove home that night, I felt good. I had sold my company to Jerry and his corporation for $2,850,000, but only $1,350,000 would show up on the transfer record. The rest of the money was in an account under a different name and could not be traced. Jerry was fine, as he had receipts for 100% of the company for the full sale price, so all records showed that $1,350,000 was the amount I received. I deposited this amount into my account, while the rest of the money was legally transferred abroad and remained untraceable in the event of a divorce. Saul was preparing my estate for the upcoming divorce, so he accounted for $350,000 as my share of the business. This was added to my share of the house and property, and the rest of the money disappeared, ensuring Joyce would never see it again. From my perspective, since this money was part of our retirement plans and Joyce had chosen to go her own way by cheating on me, she no longer had a right to it. I offered her a choice, divorce or forgiveness. If she had chosen divorce, I would have given her a fair share of everything we had. It was my fault, and I would have accepted it, but not under these circumstances. She chose to cheat for revenge, simply to feel better about herself. Her actions made our plans for the future my plans alone, and they no longer concerned her. That night, I made love to Joyce, knowing it would be the last time for me. I had loved her for so long that breaking up was more difficult than I had expected, but she left me no choice. Although I could have stopped her by revealing what I knew, it wouldn't have changed anything. Her intention to cheat was clear, and she would have done it eventually to get back at me. Joyce made her position clear in conversations with Eileen and Ron. On Wednesday morning, Joyce was especially affectionate as she walked me to work. I could sense her happiness, which made me feel a wave of sadness. I had loved her for so long that ending our relationship was harder than I had anticipated, but she left me no choice. I could have stopped her by revealing what I knew, but her intention to cheat was evident, and she would have done it eventually to get back at me. I left the car at Jerry's and took a taxi to the airport, where I made a reservation for a flight to Rio that evening. Once there, I planned to take a private, unofficial flight back to Mexico and my new home. I had time, so I spent it with Saul to check the final documents. The divorce papers were completed and would be delivered to Joyce on Thursday morning. I renegotiated the terms to ensure Joyce received all the money in the bank accounts, over $1,400,000. The trust funds for the children were already fully funded, and the money I left Joyce met all the requirements for raising them. She would probably need to return to work with her new partner to stay comfortable, but that was her concern. In addition, I placed money in an account that would pay Joyce $5,000 a month in child support, which would continue as long as all of my children's needs were met and she remained unmarried. Once she remarries or the children turn 18, the support would stop. It was hard to do, and I struggled with it until everything was finalized. The hardest part was leaving my children, but I had no other choice. I wrote a letter explaining that their mother and I had decided we could no longer live together, so I had to leave. I promised to keep in touch and that we would meet in the future if Joyce allowed. My real concern was that the money was in Mexico under the name Juan Ramirez, so I needed to stay there to enjoy it. Maybe someday I would find a way to meet them and even bring them to Mexico to spend time on the yacht and in my villa. I would find a way. If I told Joyce where I was, she would be so angry that she might try to come after me, and I couldn't allow that. I had lunch and called my friends, letting them know I would be abroad for a while and would contact them when I returned. It was unlikely, but it established my planned departure. I spent the rest of the day at a small bar and grill, drinking enough to feel relaxed but not overly intoxicated. As the clock behind the bar showed 5 p.m., I went into the phone booth at the back of the bar, closed the door, and dialed the RADA number. I asked to speak to Mr. Ron Mason's room and told the operator that he was hard of hearing, so let the phone ring. She confirmed he was there and connected the call. I waited, and finally, on the 8th ring. "Hello? Who the hell is this?" He sounded out of breath. "Hey Ron, this is Russell Cranston. I'm warning you right now, don't hang up. If you do, I'll come up to your room and break your neck. I think you're with my wife, Joyce, right now. I want you to hand her the phone immediately." There was silence on the other end until I heard my wife's angry voice in the background asking Ron who it was. He whispered something to her, and I waited. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm here alone. I have no idea where your wife is. You're wrong. No, you are wrong. Ask my wife about my past. She will confirm that I am telling the truth. Now listen carefully and remember, if you do not hand the phone to my wife right now, I will come up to your room and break your neck. I warned you once about what would happen if you didn't listen. Now I'm angry enough to do it to both of you. So give her the phone and hope I don't come for you." There was silence again, but I could hear him covering the phone as he relayed my message to her. I waited, knowing Joyce understood I wasn't joking. I thought I heard a muffled scream, followed by the sound of clothing and the creaking of bed springs before Joyce answered the phone. "Listen, Russell, it's not what you think. I know it looks bad, but we're just talking, catching up, that's all. I'll come home right now, and we can talk. It's not what you think, so please trust me." "Okay, I'll be home in a few minutes, Russ, and we'll work it out." "It's not what you think." "Sorry, Joyce, but that's exactly what I think. I tapped our phones and heard you planning to meet that person at the Rada. I heard you telling Eileen about the first time with him. Remember when you said it was even better than with me? I know everything, Joyce, and I've told you what will happen now. It's too late for your lies." "No, Russ, please. I'm sorry. I'm coming home right now, and this will never happen again. He means nothing to me. I love you only, please wait for me. I'll leave right now and be home in a few minutes." "Sorry, Joyce, but Saul will contact you tomorrow morning with the terms of the divorce. As for me, you won't see me again. I don't want anything to do with you anymore." I tried, Joyce. I really did. I apologized for my mistake and promised it would never happen again. I did everything I could, but it wasn't enough. You had to get back at me. Well, congratulations, you won. Russ, what about the children? You can't leave them. They love you and will miss you. Can you be that cruel? I don't see you caring about them now, Joyce. Did you think about them when you were with Ron Mason? Don't try to blame me, Joyce. You ruined our marriage. All you had to do was forgive me, but you couldn't. Your rage drove you to this. I heard her crying hysterically, trying to stop me from saying what she didn't want to hear. I heard her screaming at Ron, telling him to leave and never come back. He simply took what she offered and didn't risk anything. He thought he was the smartest of us all, but he forgot that I warned him, and he didn't listen. He will pay for this mistake. I'll call the kids and explain why I left. You can tell them anything, but I promise you, you better take care of them, Joyce, or I'll come back for you, and you won't like it. I don't want to see either of your partners in this house. I made sure someone will look after you, so don't make me angry, Joyce. You know what I'm capable of. I'm leaving the country tonight, and you won't hear from me again. All contact from now on will be through Saul. Farewell, Joyce. While she was yelling at me to wait, I hung up. One more final call from Jerry, and I was done with Joyce and all that had transpired. An hour after my call to Joyce, I was on my way to the airport. 3 flights and less than 10 hours later, I was in my new home. A week later, I received a copy of the local newspaper from my villa in Puerto Vallarta, detailing the explosion and complete destruction of several buildings in the north of the city that occurred 2 days after I left the country. According to the newspaper, each explosion appeared to be the result of a gas leak that had somehow ignited, causing a massive blast. Fortunately, no one was injured. The article stated the buildings were owned by Ron Mason, a local realtor, and deliberate arson was suspected. When asked to comment, Mr. Paul Mason said he believed the acts were carried out by a local bomb expert but had no evidence to support this claim. According to investigators, the man in question was overseas and could not have been responsible. The explosions were determined to be intentional, and Mr. Mason was the only suspect. If convicted, he faced 30 years in prison. I read the article several times and couldn't help but laugh each time. God bless you, Jerry. Saul contacted me several times, asking Joyce to call her and give her a way to contact me, but I told Saul to tell her I had no desire to speak with her. She threatened to contest the divorce, but Saul informed her that he had several recordings of conversations confirming her intention to cheat. If she continued to resist, Saul would make the records public in court, which could change the reason for the divorce. He also mentioned a plan to sue her company for failing to enforce moral standards, with Joyce and Ron Mason named as accomplices. She eventually gave up resistance, and the divorce was finalized in just 60 days. I counted each of them. I drove to a small private airport a few miles from my villa to meet the plane due to arrive at 2 p.m. I parked the car, entered the small terminal building, and checked the time. I nodded to a few visitors who knew me. I arrived a little early, but that was okay. I grabbed a Corona at the bar and found a seat near the window where I could watch the planes arrive. The kids were on a private flight booked from Mexico City and headed to this small airport. This was their third trip, and Joyce knew the rules for my visits included her absence. As far as she knew, they were in Mexico City, where I was now supposed to live. I would take them and spend a week with them. Jason and Julie knew where I actually lived and why I had to maintain this pretense. Jason was almost 18 and could have lived with any of us, but he wanted to go to school in the States, and I understood that. Julie, at 16, really wanted to stay with her mother. I had no problems with either of them. I just wanted them to know me and to know that I still loved them. But I didn't want Joyce to know anything about my life here. When they first came, Joyce's sister Eileen was with them. At first, I was worried she might find out the truth and spoil my first visit with the kids, but after talking to her, I changed my mind. She wasn't mad at me or blamed me for leaving Joyce. She said she was glad I did it, that Joyce needed the shock of losing me to make her see what she was doing. After talking privately with my children, I decided that Eileen should participate in these visits from now on. After the first visit, when they swore to secrecy, I brought them here to my villa. Jason and Julie were happy to keep my secret from their mother, partly because they resented Joyce for the divorce, but also because they enjoyed the boat, the horses, and the villa. The fact that their father was well off made things easier. They agreed to contact me only on my cell phone and only when I was away from Joyce. We all respected this agreement, including Eileen. The plane landed, and they hurried to the terminal where I was waiting. It was great to see them all. I stood up, ready to hug them, and met them at the door. It felt as if time had melted away. If I hadn't noticed Jason had grown another 2 inches and added 10 pounds to his lean frame and that Julie was starting to look more like a young woman than a child, it could have felt like they were still the same as before. They greeted me and ran to get their luggage. I kept clothes for them at the villa, and they could buy anything else they needed for the week. I watched them leave with fatherly pride. I turned to their fellow traveler. Were there any problems during the trip? Is Joyce still convinced you're in Mexico City? Yes, I told her we would be on our way so she could call me on my cell phone. It's the only number she has. Although she dislikes it, she knows she has no choice. This way, she won't know where we are. Happy to hear that. Though it probably won't make much difference now. It's been almost 2 years since you left. How is she doing? Not much better. She's still trying to convince herself that you'll be back soon. She spends all her time with the children and doesn't have any real friends. She has no life outside of work and her home. This is the life she chose when she decided Ron was better than you. She knows it was a huge mistake and has been attending counseling for the past 2 years to control her anger. She wanted revenge, not Ron Mason. What about you? What do you want? You know what I'm thinking. I fully expect you to come to me as soon as the children fall asleep. Am I sleeping in the same room next to you at the adjoining door? Absolutely. I will do my best to meet your expectations. You probably won't get much sleep tonight or for the next few nights. This is a promise. I expect you to keep your promise. At that moment, the children came running back with 3 overnight bags. Jason put one down so I could carry it. Here is Aunt Eileen's bag. You can carry this one, he said with a wink and a tap on the knuckles. Jason let me know he was aware of our little secret, mine and Eileen's. She never seemed to hate me as I thought she did. She was just jealous of her sister. I never knew. Am I happy now? I do not know yet. Time will tell. Even though I see them as often as I can, I miss my kids and I miss Joyce. After all, she was my only love for almost 18 years. Eileen and I are together only for physical intimacy, and our relationship is not progressing. She knows this, and so do I. She wants me to go back to Joyce, but she understands that I can't do that, at least not now, if ever. There are some very nice women here who are interested in meeting me and helping me move on from my past relationship. I might consider their offers, but I will make sure to keep my focus on what I need for my own well-being. What do you think of our story today? I think the plot of this story was quite interesting because there is a complicated story on the part of both the husband and the wife. What is your impression? Write in the comments. More videos to come.